Hello, Peter. We're not joining your team.
I'm putting together a team.
We're in.
Hello everyone, I am back, and this is a video I deliberately postponed because I wanted to see how things would play out on Monday Night Raw after I saw what happened on Friday Night SmackDown. So that's why I put that Family Guy joke there at the beginning of the video to kind of give you my feelings on the current Bloodline storyline as they head into War Games. Yeah, now while Seth Rollins has not officially joined Roman Reigns' team, and I'm kind of still holding out hope for some kind of a swerve there, and that's also going to tie into the major topic of this video, the word swerve, bro. That's going to tie in. I'm hoping for some kind of big surprise there, like Paul Heyman comes back with CM Punk, and CM Punk's the fifth guy for Roman's team. Something like that, to really spice things up a little bit, because right now, the current Bloodline storyline is specifically to reunite the original Bloodline. I like the destination point of getting those four back together, but You start off with Jey Uso being like, I want nothing to do with you guys. And then he gets screwed out of a title and he's like, I'm in. And then Sami Zayn is like, yeah, I want nothing to do with any of this. Screw you guys. And then over the course of one SmackDown, he's like, I'm not on board with any of this. Roman has to apologize and this, that, and the other. Which I feel like in a different era, like maybe in the Attitude Era, they would have stretched that out a little bit more and eventually get to a point where Roman gives an official apology and then Sami Zayn gets on board, but they kind of rushed everything to where Sami reunited with them at the end of the show after they did a tease that he joined Solo's team, which was so underdeveloped that nobody in their right mind honestly thought that Sami Zayn was going to join Solo Sikoa's team. So I was like, yeah, no one's buying this. And again, if this were the Attitude Era, I kind of feel like this would have been they would have dedicated at least an entire episode of Raw to kind of teasing you with Sami Zayn joining Solo's team, which side is he going to go with or whatever, and then you do the big reveal at the end. But as is, it just kind of felt rushed and underdeveloped. And now you've got Seth Rollins thrown in the mix, and he's saying, I won't go with Roman, I won't go with Roman. And then Bronson Reed, his enemy, joins Solo's team out of nowhere, and it's like, well, okay, so Seth's going to join at some point. He hasn't officially yet, but Solo cost him a match on Raw this week against Bronson, and it's like, okay, so Seth's probably going to join. Not a fan of it, and personally, again, I like the idea of getting the OG Bloodline back together and everything, but if The Rock was not going to be involved in this match or this story heading into War Games, then he probably should have just been 4-on-4, because shoehorning Seth and Bronson into this just kind of dilutes what the main story is supposed to be, and that's supposed to be original Bloodline versus new Bloodline, and that's kind of the attraction here. And throwing more bodies into it when you don't need more bodies, just kind of, like I said, it just kind of dilutes things. It would be like if WCW took their head out of their ass, and they actually did do NWO Hollywood versus NWO Wolfpack, and then out of nowhere, they just added, I don't know, Goldberg to the Wolfpack or something like that. It's kind of like that, where it's like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of how I feel about this. And don't even get me started on the women's War Games match. That's so shoehorned, I don't even know. I don't have enough time to go over how shoehorned that is. And that goes into my whole point that I talk about. It's like, look, War Games is not something you should do annually. It's a thing that you should do when you need it and the story calls for it. Bloodline versus Bloodline, that absolutely calls for it. Forcing 10 women into a War Games match when there's not really a major faction that you can work with, on the heel side, just feels forced, and it just feels like they're doing it just because they out of obligation, which is the worst reason to do a gimmick match. And I'm like, can't it just be a Survivor Series match? Can't one be a War Games and one be a Survivor Series match? Because I'm not a fan of doing two War Games. I'm not a fan of doing two of the same gimmick match on the same show anyway. And this one in particular feels really, really forced. And personally, I would have just done Rhea Ripley in the first. Oh, okay, so Rhea Ripley came back, and she's got the undashing Cody Rhodes face guard, and I'm like, does anybody else think she should have worn something similar to the Undertaker Phantom mask from '95? That would have been cooler, right? But it's that whole thing is just kind of messy, and it feels like they're doing it again out of obligation. They just feel, oh, the women have to have a War Games match. I'm like, no, they don't. No, they don't. No, they don't. Stop forcing it when you don't need it. And It's and again, if the bloodline storyline involved the women, I would be saying the reverse. So this isn't a sexism thing. I'd be like, no, that's the one that should get the War Games match, and the men can get something else. Figure it out. I've talked about that with 2 Royal Rumbles. It's like, look, just alternate. Don't do 2 Rumbles. That's overkill. Like, you're just making me care less about the gimmick. And you're oversaturation and everything else. And speaking of oversaturation, this is going to tie me into a couple of announcements that WWE has made recently that don't make me happy. One is that both Raw and SmackDown are going to be 3 hours once Raw makes the move to Netflix. And I'm like, why? I've been enjoying the 2-hour Raws. Not every show's been great, but the actual 2-hour format is so much better than a 3-hour format. It's so much less cumbersome, and it's very rarely has a 3-hour Raw. Okay, so the point of an episode of wrestling television is that by the end of it, I should be as excited and craving more. When you look at wrestling shows that have been really, really good over the course of wrestling history, like Saturday Night's Main Event back in the 80s, every time one of those specials was over, or at least, because they were so front-loaded, the last match would be a random squash match or something, but they would do something big that would make me feel like, oh god, I can't wait to see what happens next. The main event specials that set up WrestleManias back in the 80s were perfect examples of that. When they did the DiBiase, I bought the title thing from Andre, or the Mega Powers Explode, things like that, that made me go, ooh, I have to watch that. I got to see what happens next, because I'm excited to see what comes next. And then you get, when Raw was at its best during the Attitude Era, that 97 to 2001 period, some of the most exciting television, where every week you were like, I can't wait for the next Raw. I can't wait for the next Raw. Because something crazy would happen. It would make you excited to see what happens next. WCW at its best. Nitro, 96 to 97. And even into 98. Very exciting television that made me crave what was going to happen next. Lucha Underground, when Lucha Underground was at its best. 3 seasons. Seasons 1, 2, and 3. Typically did a very good job of making me excited for what would come next. And not making me feel like I've had my fill. And that's part of the problem with modern wrestling programming, where they give you so much, whether it be in-ring action, or big matches, or big title matches, or just the length of the show, the length of the matches, that by the time it's done, I feel like I'm good. I've had my fill of this. And it's hard to get excited for what comes next. Even if some of the storylines are good. And WWE right now, they've been much, much worse creatively. If you followed my channel for any length of time, the 2010s were not a good time creatively for the WWE. And I was just, oh god, I had to stop watching it at various points, because it's I just couldn't do it. The show was so terrible. But even when some of the storylines are good, like Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan, that stuff, good storyline, but when the show is so bloated, it kind of almost makes me forget that some of those storylines are good. And I think moving to 3-hour shows for both Raw and SmackDown, when you have a 2-hour NXT, when you have pay-per-views once a month, it's too much. No one's going to watch all this. No normal human being can watch all of that content. It's just a bloated product. And speaking of bloated, they're introducing a new championship, which I knew was coming. I knew it was flipping coming. A Women's United States Championship, which they're having a tournament for, because I haven't gotten sick of tournaments yet. I think between AEW and WWE, they've done 100 tournaments. It feels like every other month there's a new tournament starting up in one of the 2 shows, and I'm like, stop with tournaments. I can't anymore. You make me sick of tournaments. Because I remember hearing for years, I don't know how true it is, that Vince McMahon is not a fan of tournaments, which is one of the reasons why King of the Ring kind of got diluted as time went on, and I was like, oh, let's not do 3 rounds, let's do 2 rounds instead of the full tournament for the pay-per-view. And it's like, look, there are merits to doing a tournament. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Survivor Series 98 I thought worked very well. WrestleMania 4, bit of a mess. Various King of the Ring, some worked, some didn't. It's hard. And those are the one-night tournaments. And sometimes, you do some over the course of time, like the G1 Climax has worked in the past. I really liked the Bound for Glory series when TNA was doing that. I wish they had kind of refined that concept and continued doing it, because I thought it was really good for them. But then you get other ones like AEW's Continental Classic, which is just an excuse to introduce yet another belt, and I just don't give a crap, especially when they do 100 other tournaments. And it's just like, yeah, didn't WWE just do a tag team tournament like not that long ago, and now they're doing a women's tournament for a new belt that I don't care about? Because it's like, and I've talked about it before, when it gets to a point where having a championship, there's so many of them that virtually anybody can get a belt. It's like they become participation trophies at that point. They don't feel special. And it's like, look, guys, I liked it better when Roman Reigns and the Usos were the only world champion and the only tag champions. That was a much better setup because it made those belts more desirable, because you couldn't be like, oh, well, the Usos have the belts and the bloodline rule everything. I can just win the other tag titles and it's fine. And you couldn't have that backdoor. It's like, oh God, the bloodline has like a stranglehold on everything. And it made the, beating them feel like a bigger deal. Like when Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens beat them at WrestleMania 39, it felt like a bigger deal because those were the tag team titles and they'd held them for so friggin' long that when they finally lost, it felt like a big deal. Roman Reigns, fell at WrestleMania 40, and they even diluted that by introducing the world title, which was the Roman Reigns, you're not Roman Reigns belt. It's like, well, nobody can beat him, so we're just going to create another belt, which is like such a silly concept. I wasn't a fan of it then. I'm not a fan of it now. I liked having just one world champion. I like just having one women's champion, which we haven't had for a dog's age, but now it's like, oh, we've got to have mid-card women's belts. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't need it. You don't need it. You really don't. It makes being a champion feel less important when you do that, because I don't think they have the roster to really support all of those championships. And it's funny because, AEW, they really shot themselves in the foot with how they presented their product with, again, bloated programming. They have too much programming throughout the week, too many competitive matches throughout the week that make those matches feel less special, and way too many titles. Like the TNT, the friggin' international title, which has been renamed at least once or twice, the Continental title, are all virtually the same thing. Like, there's no, difference. It's not like in WCW where you got world title, US title, TV title, and there's a clear delineation. It's like, all right, there's first tier, second tier, third tier. Here it's like any one of those three belts could be the second tier belt. It's like nobody cares. It's like, who cares? WWF Attitude Era, same thing. Is that you had the world title, you had the IC title, you had the Euro title, which was the third tier belt, and you kind of understood that. It made sense. And here it's just like, I don't know what the ranking is. I don't know what the hierarchy is. It's just everything's just kind of a mess and all the belts feel the same. And when you do that, I just stop caring and I zone out because nothing matters. And it's a problem in AEW, and they did way too many tournaments for all of these belts. They do the Owen Hart tournament every year, which is two tournaments going on simultaneously. And I'm just like, ugh. And then WWE, we do King and Queen of the Ring every year now. And I'm like, ugh. And it's too much. But all of the mistakes that AEW is making, WWE is now making all those same mistakes by having too many belts, programming's too long, and there's too much of it, and too many tournaments. And I'm just like, it's too much to keep track of. And it's just, and when you get frustrated with trying to keep track of all of this, then you just kind of zone out. It's like, well, none of it matters. None of it friggin' matters. So who cares? So who's going to win the United States, the Women's United States tournament? I don't give a crap. I don't care. Who wins that? It's just another belt floating around. And guess what? Because they're doing a United States title, damn well they're going to introduce a Women's Intercontinental title. That's coming. So, who cares? It's a mess right now. And so it's like, all right, so can't make fun of AEW. Okay, I can because I'm not a brand loyalist, but you can't, WWE fans, you can't make fun of AEW for having too many belts when you have this mess going on over in WWE. And I've been screaming from on high for so long. It's like wrestling has too many belts. New Japan has too many belts. WWE has too many belts. AEW has too many belts. TNA probably has too many belts. Why do you have Knockouts tag titles now? Nobody cared about those belts when you introduced them, back in the late 2000s. Because you didn't have enough women to support a tag roster. So what's the point? What is the point? And again, it's not a sexism thing. It's a you have too many belts already thing, and now you're throwing more into the mix. And it just dilutes what it means to be a champion, and you're just dividing your roster more and more to the point where the competition for each belt is going to diminish. And, good luck trying to figure all that out. I remember there were times during the brand split, And it's probably, it's better now than it was back then. Like, they at least have some teams on both shows, but the Raw tag division is vastly inferior to the SmackDown tag division right now, and that's what happens when you split everything in two. But there were times during the brand split years where it was like, they had 4 tag teams in the entire company and 2 sets of tag belts. And I'm like, what's the point of that? Like, what are we doing? Just put all the tag teams on one show and just have 1 set of tag champs. I'm like, what are we doing? And that's part of my frustration with the brand split, where it's like, you've got SmackDown people showing up, and WWE has always been bad at this. Ever since they did the brand split, for way back in 2002, they've always been really bad at this. And giving both shows their own identity, where, you know, the closest thing they ever had to having their own identity, their own like separate identities, is that SmackDown would have the Cruiserweight division, which gave it something. And there was that point in 2004 where Raw was kind of like old school, you know, Jim Crockett promotion, NWA, Blood and Guts wrestling. And SmackDown was like Saturday morning cartoon wrestling, with like, you know, Booker T going to a voodoo woman to go fight The Undertaker and like silly stuff like that. It was stupid. It was terrible. But at least it was like, okay, that was like one of the few times where both shows felt different from each other. But, you know, for the majority of the time that Raw and SmackDown have existed as different brands, it's just one's red WWE and one's blue WWE, and NXT lost everything that made that show special, and it's just Little League WWE that's not as good, when it was something very different back in like the 2014 era, when it was really something special and something different. Now it's just like, it's just, you know, it's Little League, it's WWE Little League, so it's like, who cares? There's no like distinct identity for Raw and SmackDown, and it's not helped by the fact that Raw and SmackDown people show up on both shows without any rhyme or reason anyway, so what's the point of having a brand split? I don't know. But all this ranting and raving is going to lead me into the main topic of this video, which is the creative side of things and the formatting of the television for both WWE and AEW. This is across the board. I've already spent most of this video talking about how bad, you know, and again, it's not that both shows are flipping terrible, and I've seen worse, but they're severely lacking in, and I think at the end of the day, what the problem is that they don't feel like television shows. They feel like, just, again, overly bloated artistic expressions where people need to be told no. Like, hey, maybe having a 20-minute match on TV is not the best idea, and doing that every single week on every single show is not the best idea, and maybe, you know, having the match of the night or a pay-per-view quality match on TV every week is actually diminishing what it means to have pay-per-view quality matches. And it's making the match, again, I've said this before in past videos, is like, look, I try to keep up with Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, Rampage, and Collision. So those are the 5 shows I try to keep up with. And, you know, the 2-hour shows, I can typically get through them in about 45 minutes. When you skip the pointless matches that don't matter, which is most of them, the matches that go too long, which is most of them, and you watch like the angles and promos, and you focus on that, you can get through like any 2-hour show. Like, you can get everything you need out in like 45 minutes. And freaking Rampage, there have been some episodes of Rampage I've gotten through in like 10 minutes. Like, because that's all matches, and it's like a handful of promos. There'll be a Harley Cameron promo in there that makes Rampage worth it, but other than that, it's just nothing. And it's just, man, and, you know, I've been thinking about this for a while. When you look at how, like, you know, the in-ring action doesn't matter the way it should, titles don't matter the way it should, there's too much of it, everything's too bloated, and and everything is so monotonous and so repetitive and so formulaic and so trapped within its own wrestling bubble. Like, these are the things we need to do as a wrestling show, and these are what the fans expect and the fans want. I'm like, sometimes the fans are wrong. Like, because I've had some people defend this new United States title to me, and it's like, okay, they'll do this tournament, someone will win it, and it'll be yet another title floating around that they won't know what to do with half the time because they've got to make room for all the other belts. And AEW, I can't tell you how many cards and pay-per-views I've seen where it's like, dude, like, every match is a title match. What is going on? What is going on? It's a mess. So I've thought about this extensively, and he's actually, the person I'm going to talk about, has made comments recently about if AEW hired him, he could get the ratings back up within a year. And that man is Vince Russo, former creative head of WWF when they were at their peak in the Attitude Era. The ratings were never higher. And WCW, which died a slow and painful death under his watch, was all of it his fault. It's up for debate. I can say that a lot of the programming during that time was very, very bad. And if you're head of creative, you kind of got to take some of the blame for that. And he was also head of creative in TNA, where some of his creative I really liked, especially early on when I started watching in 2004. That was when I first started watching TNA. And I actually liked Russo's booking over Dusty's, because Dusty took over the book in November of 2004. And when Dusty took over, there was a noticeable decline in the quality of the creative. Now, granted, when Russo was booking, there was a couple of those stupid gimmick matches, like the Luck of the Irish match and the tag team last man standing match that they did at Victory Road 2004 between AMW and Triple X, which was a fiasco. And there were some great matches under Dusty's watch, like the AJ and Daniels 30-minute Iron Man match, and the match I think is the best match in TNA history, AMW versus Triple X and the Six Sides of Steel. So I'm not saying it was all bad under Dusty, I'm not saying it was all good under Russo, but in the week-to-week programming, there was a noticeable decline in the quality of the programming under Dusty's watch. And that was when the pay-per-view started to get over Gimmick. That was when, like, they were pushing some weird people in weird positions. Like Triton got a push. Did anybody remember Triton? Like that was a bad idea. They turned Monty Brown heel when that was an absolutely wrong decision to make, when he was one of the hottest baby faces in the promotion. Turning him heel at that point in time was stupid, and it completely derailed Monty, and he never regained that momentum again. And that happened under Dusty Rhodes. So, and I like Dusty's booking for NXT and what he did there creatively. That was when NXT was at its best. And I remember watching that version of NXT under Dusty's watch, and I'm like, where was this when he was booking TNA? What the hell, man? I don't know. Maybe it was a different mindset, whereas like maybe with TNA, he felt like he had to create a lockdown to try and get like any eyeballs on the product. Whereas with NXT, you kind of understand it's minor league WWE. And it's like, okay, that gives me a little bit of room to, do things a little bit better with better pacing and kind of do things my way, how I would feel without having, cable companies and things and advertisers breathing down my neck too much. So maybe that was why. I don't know. But in any case, Russo at time, going back to Vince Russo, at times, like, I've liked his creative and I've really disliked his creative. I haven't hated everything that he did. I didn't love everything that he did. And Russo's a polarizing figure, to say the least, where you have the Jim Cornettes of the world who completely hate him and hate everything he ever did and think he was the worst thing to ever happen to wrestling. And you have some people that think that he's got the Midas touch and, if somebody else gave him a chance, like, wrestling would instantly be better. And he does have his defenders, believe it or not. And I'm more in the middle. But when I see just how formulaic and stale and bloated modern wrestling programming is, I just sit there and I go, do we need Russo back to kind of spice things up a little bit? Because at the very least, and he's had good ideas. And look, I'm going to give Russo his props here. If I was going to do a video listing, let's say, my top 10 favorite storylines in WWE history, Undertaker versus Kane and Austin versus McMahon would be in the top 5. Both of those were happening simultaneously in 1998 under Russo's watch. And I think Russo deserves credit for that. I think, it was his creative direction that led to those two storylines. And two of the very best in company history, and they were happening on Raw at the same time, in the same year. And that was when Raw was arguably at its best. So I do think Russo deserves a lot of credit for that. I also think Russo, at the very least, has an understanding that it's a television product, and what he should be doing is telling stories that make people excited to want to see the matches. And that's sorely missing from WWE, and especially AEW right now, where it's like, oh, we just deliver great matches all the time. Every match gets a "this is awesome" chant, and we're golden. And it's like, you're not making me want to see anything. You're just putting action in front of my face. You're Michael Baying it. It's like, that's the best way I can describe it, because those Transformers movies are garbage, except for the first one. The first one's okay, but it's just throwing shit in your face constantly. It's just constant action, constant action, constant action. And after a while, you just get desensitized to it. I remember watching, I think it was Age of Extinction. It was the one that had the Dinobots in it. So whichever one that was, it doesn't really matter. But I remember watching that movie in theaters. And by the end of it, it's this, grand spectacle and this big explosive climax. And I'm sitting there watching it like, I don't know what they're fighting over, who's fighting, except for Optimus Prime. I don't know what the point is. I don't know who's on whose side. Like, the whole thing is just a mess, but it looks cool, I guess. It's just a mess, and that's kind of what wrestling feels like right now, where it's just, oh, we deliver action and star ratings and this is awesome chants all the time. It's like, yeah, but what's the point of any of it? And all you're doing is desensitizing me to all of the stuff. And actually, they did this angle recently, which, under normal circumstances probably would have worked, but where Kevin Owens pile drove Randy Orton, and they said, oh, the pile driver's a banned move. And I'm like, dude, don't you do flip pile drivers on TV every week? I feel like I see flip pile drivers like all the time. Definitely in AEW. WWE does it too, right? Like, I remember when the flip pile, because ideally, logically, the flip pile driver should be more devastating than a regular pile driver, right? When Petey Williams was the only one doing it, you felt like it was like a killer, like one of the best finishers in the business. And then it became the most overused move in the business, and people stopped caring. And it's like, okay. I mean, it's either that or the super kick, which is the most overused move in pro wrestling. Yeah, it's a mess. But anyway, they did this angle, and I'm sitting there like, I like the idea of making a move look like it's super dangerous and everything, but when you allow tombstone pile drivers and flip pile drivers and even like theoretically more dangerous moves like Orton's punt and the curb stomp, which Seth still does, it's like, aren't those more dangerous? Shouldn't those moves be banned too? Why is just the regular pile driver the only one that's banned? A move that was a regular finisher at one point. And it just kind of like, it rang kind of hollow to me because it's like, of the way everything is presented in modern wrestling. I mean, granted, I'll take an injury angle over that bit they did with Orange Cassidy a while back where it's like he took a pile driver on the steel steps and made a comeback. And I'm like, oh my God, what are we doing? What are we doing? There's got to be a happy medium in between where both can work. But going back to my point about Russo, at the very least, I feel like he understands that it's a television product, and he needs to create situations that makes people excited for the upcoming matches, which theoretically would come on TV a few weeks down the road, or on pay-per-view where people would, take time out of their day to see it. Cause it's hard, and I've made this point many times before. It's like, I can't imagine kids today getting that excited over a pay-per-view because there's so many of them, and the programming on week to week is so like, you get competitive matches all the time. How do you get super excited for a pay-per-view now? Like, I don't know, unless it's like a big once-in-a-lifetime match involving part-timers that aren't on TV every week. It's hard to imagine kids getting that excited over it. I don't know, but in any case, I think Russo does have that understanding. I actually remember Cornette going on one of his rants about Russo and talking about how like he wrote an episode of Raw where like every match ended on a disqualification. There were like 6 DQs throughout a 2-hour show, and I think I know which episode it was because I remember this episode. And it aired on Saturday night. This might have been the Westminster Dog Show week, and Raw got moved to Saturday instead. And this is the show where Vince, I believe, I don't know for sure, I'm just assuming here, but Vince McMahon opens up the show and calls Kane and Undertaker a bunch of pussies. And they come out, threaten Vince, and then throughout the rest of the show, they come out and beat up everybody and cause every match to end in a no contest or whatever. And Cornette tells the story. It's like, look, we've got 6 matches here. They're all ending in DQs. And Vince Russo said something to the effect of, DQ, schmeqs, it doesn't matter. And he had a similar interaction with fans when he was writing for TNA. It's like, look, you're writing a 2-hour show and you've only got like 15 minutes worth of in-ring action on a 2-hour show. And he's like, can you believe these wrestling fans, these losers, timing fake matches and blah, 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 all this other stuff. And that's probably not the right way to express yourself. But in those situations, I would express that Vince Russo's line of thinking is actually kind of correct. It's just that he's not expressing himself very well. Or maybe he's incapable of expressing himself well. I don't know. Like, I've tried listening to his podcast. I can't. He says bro so many times. I just can't listen to him. But that particular episode of Raw, again, assuming I'm correct and it's that episode, I would have said, look, Jim, we're trying to sell a pay-per-view here where Austin is going to go up against Undertaker and Kane in a triple threat match. That's essentially a handicap match. We want it to look like Austin's screwed. And if we have Undertaker and Kane destroy everybody, it'll paint the picture that we need to paint that Austin's screwed at the pay-per-view and people are going to tune in to see is Austin going to get destroyed, or is he going to find some way to get out of it? And it led to one of the best pay-per-view endings of all time, where Undertaker and Kane pinned Austin at the same time. You knew Austin had just lost the title, but we didn't know who the champion was. But Vince runs out with the belt and says, it's mine, it's mine. You don't have it anymore, flips off Austin, and then drives away into the night with the belt. It's one of the best pay-per-view endings ever, and it led to the next night on Raw with the famous Zamboni incident, which I've said in a previous video is my all-time favorite episode of Monday Night Raw. So creatively, it all worked out. Again, assuming I'm correct, and that was the episode Jim was talking about. So if I were Russo, I would have expressed it that way, where it's like, look, we need to get to this point with Austin and Undertaker and Kane, and this is how we're doing it. And if we have a few matches end on a disqualification to make Undertaker and Kane look strong, that's just how it goes. But this is the story we're telling throughout the night. And in the TNA example that I brought up, I would be like, look, again, if I were Russo, I would have expressed myself with, look, I need to get people to care about the matches that actually matter. So on TV, it needs to be mostly angles, promos, skits, whatever I got to do to get people to care about the upcoming matches. If I gave you a 5-star match every single week, it's not going to feel like a 5-star match after a while. Case in point, look at what AEW is going through right now. They deliver great matches every week, right? Nobody cares. Nobody flipping cares, because it's old hat now. It's like they've seen it. They've seen everything. And now they've got to kind of re-educate people and get them to get used to, making them care about those big matches. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit when I preview Full Gear, because that's happening this weekend. It's a stellar card that they've put together. So going back to my question, does AEW or WWE need Vince Russo back to kind of bring some kind of an X factor back to television? Because again, when Russo was at his best, when the television was at its best, it felt like each episode of Raw or, when TNA was at its best creatively. I like some of the stuff he did in TNA. I talk about the 04 stuff. I like the Main Event Mafia. I know a lot of people online at the time didn't like it. I liked it. I thought it was kind of fun, and any excuse to give Scott Steiner a microphone I think is a win, and that angle gave Scott Steiner full rage to be Scott Steiner, and I loved it. So there was, not all of it was gold obviously, but I generally enjoyed the Main Event Mafia. I remember that one episode of Impact where they took over the show, and Scott Steiner was the ring announcer, again, comedy gold. Nash and Booker were the commentators, again, comedy gold. And they took over the show, and I'm like, this is one of the best episodes of Impact in a long time. And then the TNA roster came back and kicked them out, and then it just turned into a regular Impact. I'm like, this is boring. Go back to the Main Event Mafia show. That was so much better. And they didn't do it every week, so that episode actually stood out. And that's kind of where I'm getting at, where Russo's kind of approach to wrestling is to tell a storyline throughout the night and help each episode stand out. And again, it doesn't always work. Look at WCW in 2000. That was, one of the worst wrestling shows of all time. But I will give it this. At least those shows were memorable. I will give it that. At least those shows were memorable. It's not like modern WWE or modern AEW where I'll watch a show and I'll forget about it within a week. And, I'm thinking back to his TNA days. He also came up with the idea for that massive, 30-man brawl all over the Impact Zone, which is one of the best. Go back and watch that. That was one of the best produced things I've ever seen. And apparently Jim Cornette had a lot to do with that, because he looked at what Vince Russo's idea was and was like, oh God, how the hell are we going to do this? And he had to figure out how to do all this. And it's like, if Jim and if Cornette and Russo could actually work together, they would probably, because that's a perfect example of it, where Russo had the idea, Cornette supposedly, helped make it work. And it's like, maybe, if they could actually work together, they could probably do a really good job. But I do feel like, again, going back to my earlier point, I do feel like Russo has an understanding that it's a television show and he needs to kind of operate like a television show. And he needs to, make you feel like when the show's over, you want to see more. You don't want to feel content. You don't want to feel like I've gotten my fill. You want to see more. And that's a basic thing with how television shows are presented. I think Russo, at the very least, for all of his good ideas and for all of his bad ideas, he at least understands that. So should WWE or AEW bring him back and give him a chance? I don't know. But at this point, I'd be willing to give it a shot, because something's got to shake up and make these shows more exciting to watch. Because it's like, man, I'll watch an episode of Raw, I'll watch an episode of Dynamite, and then it's almost completely forgotten, right after it's done. It's except for those bright spots, like, you know, I put over Harley Cameron and the Outrunners, who I really enjoy watching. I just hope, and that's another thing. Like the people, I had a friend tell me this once, a while ago. This was a few months ago. He told me it's like, dude, I feel like I could produce a better show for AEW with the guys that they're not using. And I think Russo had again, to put another feather in his cap, he had a way of like seeing potential in people that you probably wouldn't expect to. Like Crash, was Crash Holly like his? The Houdini of hardcore, no, that was after he left in '99. But the super heavyweight thing with the scales, that was Russo, right? That was probably Russo's idea, and the Brood was probably one of Russo's idea, and that was pretty cool for a while. You know, he has a way of like seeing potential in people where there may not be potential. He also has a habit of doing bad parodies of people on the other show. Like he was responsible for the Voodoo Kin Mafia, Gilbert, Oklahoma, all bad ideas. So I do think, and people have made this point in the past, maybe Russo needs to be in a system where he doesn't have final say over creative. He's just allowed to present ideas, and then you have like an editor like a Vince McMahon or somebody who's like, this is the final say. It's like, all right, I like this idea. Let's do it in this way. I want to get to this point. Let's do it in this way. And Bischoff has made this point too. It's like, look, Russo will come up with an idea, but then if you ask him, okay, where do we go with that? He doesn't know, because he's just thinking about the show that night. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you can take someone like that and have, as long as you have somebody at the top who has like the guiding vision of like, okay, this is where I want to go. These are the matches I want to have. Let's get to these points. And Russo can kind of fill in the blanks and make exciting television week to week to make those matches work. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. So all I know is that right now a lot of the wrestling programming is monotonous and boring, and a lot of it is too bloated. Again, I don't know if he can fix AEW, because it's like, dude, how do you make that system work where it's like 3 shows a week and they're not spread out across the week? It's all like kind of clumped together in random chunks, and it's just kind of a mess. And I don't know if it would work. So who knows? I'm just kind of thinking out loud at this point. It's like, would Russo actually be a benefit to modern day wrestling? Because I'm seeing, you know, a show without Russo's influence, it becomes very apparent that it's like, it's very formulaic, very safe, and kind of boring. And then you have everybody going out. The mindset, which we need to get past the mindset. I need to go out there and have the best match of the show. No, you do not. That needs to stop immediately. That needs the whole chasing star ratings thing needs to stop, because it's just choking the business. Because it's like, I want every wrestler that has that mindset to go watch the movie Muppets Most Wanted. And no, it's not the best Muppet movie by a long shot, but go watch that movie, and when the evil Kermit takes over the show, it says, do whatever you want, and everybody takes too long, and they do their solos and all this other stuff. The Muppet Show becomes a boring mess because it's too friggin' long, and the things that they're doing, these great artistic expressions that they're doing, don't work. And you don't get over by being an amazing worker and having amazing matches. You get over by being awesome. And I see potential in the guys that seem to understand that. The Outrunners understand that. I think Harley Cameron understands that. I think people like R-Truth understands that. That dude got over just by being a silly goof. And like, well, how many great matches has R-Truth had? Like, no, he got over by being a silly goof. Okay, this is the point. I've made this point before. I'm going to make it again. WrestleMania. They did a 4-way ladder match, which I groaned immediately when they signed that match, because it should have been R-Truth and Miz versus Judgment Day for the tag titles and nobody else involved. But they had to gimmick it up, so okay, sure, whatever. And it's like, R-Truth was the star of that match, and he did it purely by treating it like a regular tag match, which was funny and memorable, and way more memorable than all the stupid stunts they did with the ladders that night. So, you know, all right, so which way is right? I don't know. Here we are, all these months removed from WrestleMania. I don't remember any of the other spots in that match. But I remember R-Truth acting like a goof and trying to make tags in a tornado tag style situation. So that was more memorable than anything else they did in the match. So which way's right? I don't know. So just food for thought. I don't have a definitive answer on this question that I'm proposing. I just maybe Russo's exhausted all of his chances at this point, because you saw what happened in WCW. TNA, that didn't end up very well. It ended up losing the deal with Spike TV, and TNA's kind of been struggling ever since. So, you know, it's like, has he exhausted all of his opportunities? I don't know. But I'm at the point right now where things are so monotonous and so formulaic and so boring. I'm like, can we give him a chance? I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? So, again, just food for thought. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Next week, I promise, I am doing the Q&A video. I've gotten a few more questions, and it will be coming next week. I just want to get this out there before Full Gear. Which, let me do a preview of Full Gear real quick. Let me run down this amazing card. We've got, on the pre-show, we've got Big Boom AJ versus QT Marshall on the pre-show. Look, I'm all for, like, celebrity involvement and everything like that, but these Costco people and that whole thing, it just makes me hate the internet. It makes me hate TikTok, especially. I just don't care about any of this. I get that it's an attraction. I get that for whatever reason, these Costco people are a thing right now, but, no, I'm not feeling it. We've got MJF versus Roderick Strong. I like that they're delaying MJF and Adam Cole, but this whole storyline just doesn't work for me because Adam Cole was clearly the heel in the whole situation that led up to this. And MJF's transformation while he was partnered with Adam Cole felt genuine. So it's like, you can't just kind of retcon it and be like, no, MJF was the dickbag the whole time. It's like, no one buys that. So MJF will probably win this match, I would imagine. You got Jay White versus Hangman Adam Page. Hangman Adam Page had that cage match with Swerve Strickland. Regardless of how you feel about that match, was it too far? Was, whatever it was. By the end of it, Hangman felt like the top heel in AEW. And since then, he's had absolutely no momentum. He's just been feuding with Jay White for some reason. It's like, okay, whatever. So we've halted his momentum. That's another thing. They're really bad at maintaining people's momentum after big moments. But you got a 4-way tag match for the AEW Tag Team Championship. Private Party defending against my boys, the Outrunners. The Kings of the Black Throne, Malachi Black and Brody King, and the Acclaimed, Anthony Bowens and Matt Caster. I would mark out like a son of a bitch if Truth Magnum and Turbo Floyd won the belts. I don't think they're going to, but they are getting a pay-per-view spot. They'll get to show off what they can do in a bigger setting. Here's hoping this leads to some big things for them and they get some momentum out of this. I think Private Party retains because they just won the belt, but I would be in favor of a title change here because they already got their big win and this would be an opportunity to kind of shake things up a little bit. So that's my opinion. We got Mercedes Moné versus Chris Statlander. I don't understand this at all. They just randomly turned Chris face after conditioning us to hate her for months and months. She just ditched the manager. It was like, no, I'm a good guy again. Hi. And I'm going for a belt. Hi. And no one buys it. It's just, it makes this entire storyline feel hollow. So I think Mercedes Moné retains. Then we got Swerve Strickland versus Bobby Lashley. That could be a really good match. I kind of like the Hurt Syndicate or whatever they're calling themselves. Shelton Benjamin looks pretty good. What is he, 49? And he looks that good. And they're kind of redefining him as more of like a brute. And I'm kind of digging that element of it. So yeah, is Swerve going to lose his first pay-per-view match back? Because this is Lashley's first AEW match. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do. They're also doing, before I get into the other matches on the show, they're also doing Mariah May's celebration, her title win celebration at the pay-per-view, which I like. I wish they had started promoting it weeks ago, and then this Anna Jay feud that they've been doing in between, like Anna Jay's like, well, I'm going to spoil your celebration by winning the title before the pay-per-view, so how's that sound? And give it more of a storyline direction, but it's like she beat Anna Jay. It's like, okay, now I'm going to do my celebration. It's like, and I don't know, which idea came up first or whatever, but it would have been nice if the two kind of coincided and worked together. Again, hindsight's 2020, but it would have been nice if like the celebration was announced beforehand and then Anna Jay wanted to play spoiler. That would have added a little bit more to their feud and actually would have provided somewhat of a build-up for the celebration. And as I said in a previous video, I actually like having non-wrestling segments on the video to break up the action because if there's anything you know about AEW pay-per-views, they are friggin' long. So a break from the action is a good thing. So I anticipate Tony Storm will probably come back here. That would be nice. You get a nice segment out of it and a nice break from the action. So that is all good. Anyway, then we've got for the TNT Championship, Jack Perry versus Daniel Garcia. AEW has this eternal hard-on for Daniel Garcia. I still don't see it, but whatever. I would have Daniel Garcia win the belt here, I guess, and just kind of let the Elite continue to kind of disappear from the show and let them maybe come back and feud with Moxley's group at some point. Again, I don't know what the direction is for that storyline, but I would just have since they like Garcia so much, just let Garcia win the belt here and see what he can do. Then we got Will Ospreay versus Kyle Fletcher. Again, this is a feud I could have enjoyed, but just felt a little, well, it doesn't help that Kyle Fletcher is like, he does this whole transformation thing, turns heel, shaves his head, and then his next match is against Commander, and it's a competitive match. I'm like, shouldn't he be killing him? Shouldn't that be a squash match? But whatever. Anyway, this maybe it'll turn into something for Fletcher. I don't know. Will Ospreay will probably get the win here, I would imagine. And then we've got the main event for the AEW World Title, Jon Moxley versus Orange Cassidy. I'm actually I like the Death Riders as a concept. Sometimes in presentation it's not working. I'm still curious to see where this goes. A lot of people are speculating that Shane McMahon is going to be revealed to be the mastermind behind the whole thing, and that he's the greater power of the Death Riders Ministry of Darkness or something like that. But that would be exciting if they went that route with it. But I'm curious to see where they go. Again, Moxley versus Orange is not the most exciting main event for a pay-per-view, and Moxley's going to retain, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see where they take the story moving forward. So, but another part of the problem is that they've got so many heel stables right now. They've got Death Riders, they've got the Hurt Syndicate, they've got the House of Black, they've got there was another one I was saying. Oh, the Don Callis family. They've got so many, and it's just like, it's hard to keep track of it all sometimes. Again, adding to kind of the bloated feeling of AEW programming. But that's Full Gear. Not a great card, but we'll see what happens. But again, that is all I have for you now. Thanks everybody. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. Again, my Q&A video is coming next week. I promise. You have one more week to submit questions for that. So go ahead and do that if you have not done so already. And if you're going to watch Full Gear this weekend, I hope you enjoy it. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I will see you later.